Hi, you're listening to Tales from the Tech Corridor, a brand new podcast series in which I am asking entrepreneurs and founders of exciting tech businesses what inspired them and how they got from their initial idea to where they are today. I'm Joanna Goodman. I'm a tech journalist. My guests are at the forefront of developments in our digital and connected world, and we are talking about the innovations that are changing how we live and work. Our first guest is Oliver Tucker, CEO and co-founder at Wireless Logic, Europe's leading machine-to-machine and IoT platform provider, which has more than 6.5 million subscribers all over the world. It's one of those companies you may not have heard of, but its technology powers the SIM connectivity that underpins everyday applications, from electronic payments to healthcare monitoring to Just Eat. Wireless Logic was founded in 2000, so at 21, it's certainly an IoT pioneer. Welcome, Oliver, and thanks for joining us.
Hi, Joanna. Thanks for having me.
It's great to meet you. Well, as somebody who's always been a technologist, I'm going to start with a little warm-up. What's the first piece of tech that you remember?
Probably the first one I remember, which I think, aided in terms of communication in general, was the car phone. I think, those were before people walked around with the brick-like devices hanging off their ears. But I think before that, as I say, a few people had, a car phone. Most of them were traveling salesmen, which I was one of them at the time. And I think, it kind of revolutionized being able to do, in many respects, work whilst on the move. I do think there have been others. I think, obviously, again, the car phone was probably the mid-'80s. I think the internet in the mid-'90s. I think that really came about in 1991. And, of course, email. Email, again, I think it was Hotmail that came about in 1996.
Yeah, when I was first a journalist, I had to ask to use the Google. Oliver, I'd love you to say a few words about Wireless Logic and how it powers the operations between household names and businesses. I mentioned Just Eat, but there's a lot more significant ones than that.
Yeah, I think that, when we think about sort of the Internet of Things, or IoT as it's known more these days. When we first started, it was known as machine-to-machine communication. And in many respects, it was just that. It was the ability of assets, if you like, or machines that were out in the field, being able to communicate information to an operation center that then actions were taken based on that information. So a good example may be a vending machine. A vending machine is in your office. And every other Wednesday, a guy comes out and empties the coin drawer and fills up the lilt. Well, the coin drawer could have been full for a week and the lilt could have been empty for 3 days. So not a particularly efficient way of being able to manage the ROI on that vending machine. So machine-to-machine technology, in many respects, came about where cellular became ubiquitous in the same way as we use mobile phones constantly. Because it's everywhere. That enabled, if you like, a technology to be afforded to machines that are out in the field that could communicate, if you like, remotely. And so we kind of realized that there was a market for these machines, in the same way that if you take mobile phones these days, I think particularly in the Western world, the penetration is probably around about 130%. Some of us have got two devices or even more. Whereas in machines, when you think of the amount of machines, there are more machines in the world than there are people. And yet the number that can communicate are still in their single digits. So the market has got huge opportunity. The applications really are endless when you think of the machines that are out there in the field, and that actually constantly or maybe sporadically send information or need to send information. And that could be, if you take your home environment, it could be your electricity meter, it could be your gas meter, it could be your burglar alarm. your burglar alarm might be fixed up by or communicate through a fixed line. But generally, there's a backup in case a burglar cuts through the main line or what have you, or the main line is disabled for whatever reason. So I think, how we came about this market is realizing that these machines needed to be able to communicate, and therefore wondering where we fitted within the value chain. And I think, when you look at the value chain of IoT, there's the software that interrogates the data or transmits the data. Then there's the module, which is like a modem. And then there's sort of what we would call the connectivity wrap and the services associated with that. Our services include a platform to manage all those assets and that connectivity and see how much data you're transmitting, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we realized by putting all that together, then you could provide a very good solution to whether it was operation managers or production managers or whatever that needed to get management information out of a particular device.
It's boosting efficiency in the enterprise because you're managing logistics. And of course, we never used to send for everything in the past, and now we send for everything. Logistics is basically makes the world go round, doesn't it?
And I think, cellular, M2M, machine-to-machine technology, we came into it in sort of 2006, 2007, and you said at the top of the hour we were a pioneer, and we were a pioneer. But actually, machine-to-machine technology has existed over fixed line for some time. It's just that not many machines were hooked up to be able to communicate information, but it still existed even back into the 1990s. It's only when cellular became ubiquitous, if you like, that machines that are out in the field could communicate in terms of that information, which made them, as I say, far more efficient, and people realizing, organizations realizing that the return on investment on making this technology or putting the technology into assets, could see a great return for them.
Yeah, that's fantastic. But it's also really interesting as well that nobody ever thought of that. It's like when you got a phone, and even when we first got mobile phones, nobody said, oh, what I really want is a phone where I can switch central heating on remotely. We used phones to talk to people. So it is a bit of a leap of faith, isn't it? From enterprise connectivity, almost supply chain and logistics, to our everyday lives. Can you tell us a bit about the journey, how your ideation from M2M connectivity to the Internet of Things?
Sure. I mean, when we set out in 2000, when we set the company up, I guess we were doing something similar to what we were doing now, but we were mobilizing back-end applications for enterprises. It was not until 2007 where really we came across machine-to-machine technology. So instead of, if you like, mobilizing applications that people used, we were still mobilizing data that people used, but it was, as I say, a slightly different variant. And this was before things like BlackBerry. And that's really where we kind of started to mobilize not only email, but other type applications. I think probably where we slightly stumbled was the fact that the PDA, personal digital assistant type devices at the time, weren't sophisticated enough to manage a lot of this, or a lot of these applications. And I think, it was all about mobile data. That's what our last company did. That's what we started Wireless Logic doing, but it was more in the enterprise space. So machine to machine is still about mobilizing data, but it's just more machines rather than enterprises and people.
Yeah, and also, of course, wireless connectivity and broadband has enabled all of this. So you kind of gave you the ability to move your applications to the edge, to the smartphone, to the devices themselves, rather than just the platform.
And I think, Joanna, originally machine-to-machine IoT was meant to be small amounts of data often. So if you take your energy meter, it transmits how much energy you've read instead of someone coming out to read your meter, once a month. That uses very, very small amounts of data. Whereas, these days, huge amounts of data is transmitted. If you're if you've got a video camera that's recording stuff, and we do a lot of things for, if you take car parks at stations, for instance, now you don't go and buy a ticket. Generally you don't buy a ticket, or you do buy a ticket. But if you don't buy a ticket, it's not someone coming around to slap a ticket on your windscreen. It's a video camera that's looking at the entrance and the exit to making sure that they can marry up your number plate with the ticket you've bought. And if you haven't, then they send you a ticket in the post. And that, because you're video recording number plates or whatever, requires far more bandwidth, because it's requiring higher amounts of data. So now what we do is, we do very small amounts of data for things like metering or monitoring, as an example. But then also we do applications where, it requires huge amounts of data, as I say, like video. The nice thing to me about our industry is the applications literally are endless.
You also underpin another essential of the pandemic, which is Just Eat and food deliveries, don't you?
I mean, we've seen a lot of, specific COVID type applications. If you go to a sort of a convenience store off a petrol station, or indeed in Aldi stores, we do occupancy management. So it's the traffic light system to manage the amount of people that are in stores or supermarket to maintain social distancing during COVID. So that's another example of a specific IoT application during the pandemic. I mean, we have others where, for instance, I think it's in Scotland, where we have robotic drones that deliver shopping from a store to home. I think actually that's currently deployed with Co-op in Milton Keynes, as an example.
You've mentioned a lot about the data and the transmission of data. What are the biggest challenges to IoT applications? I mean, is it data security? What are your main challenges in developing these applications?
Yeah, pretty much, I think, spot on in terms of security of data. I think a lot of this information is not nice to have information, it's mission critical information. If you're monitoring, I don't know, diabetes for patients, for instance, that's mission critical information, whereas a lot of IoT data is, and therefore also the transmission of that data, not only reliably, but securely, is hugely important. And I think that, there have been a lot of scare stories in the press where, for instance, I don't know, people have left stuff, IoT devices or devices in general, with default passwords, they've left them unchanged, unpacked software, that type of stuff. And therefore those kind of vulnerabilities mean that, as I say, there have been stories of people, strangers accessing, for instance, baby monitors, where they've been able to go in, hack a baby monitor, and then be able to communicate or talk, not necessarily talk, but observe or whatever it is, depending on whether it's a camera or just an audio device. Those are the type of things that I think people have got a little bit spooked by. But I think, people have just got to realize that IoT devices, they should be treated in the same way from a security point of view, as you would do your iPhone or your laptop or anything else. But I think when I also talk about security, it's about securing that data. That you're not letting it go unhindered over the internet. We set up VPN tunnels over the internet, so that data is transmitted securely, reliably, with the appropriate SLAs. And as I say, when it's mission critical data, that's vitally, vitally important. So I think, yes, I think some of the challenges are insecurity. I think, with any relatively nascent industry, I think, compatibility and regulation issues are also sometimes challenging, lack of standards, competing technologies. If you remember, it seems ages ago now, but with video recorders, there were different standards, weren't there? VHS and Betamax. In some of the IoT technology, you got different standards, which sometimes, therefore, create confusion on behalf of the customer. And I think, as we talked about before, bandwidth, I think, before, when we started this out, there was kind of 2G GPRS and then 3G.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we've got 4G and 5G pretty much in some cities is already there. But what that does is enable, if you like, greater bandwidth, greater hungry applications to be delivered with no latency, more devices to be able to connect to the internet. And that's only a good thing. As I say, we've talked about video. That's data hungry, right? And therefore, doing that over GPRS is slow. It's not very clear, all those type of things. So I think the emergence of new technologies has helped drive the IoT market and the applications within it.
Oliver, how dependent are these edge applications on the network providers for the mobile phones? So if you're with EE or you're with Vodafone, does it make any difference?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think, we deal with about 47 different network operators, giving us access to about 750 networks across the whole of the globe. And we deal with those because we offer choice to our customers. Because, as you know, with your mobile phone, you could put a router or a phone in one corner of your house and then a router or a phone in another corner of the house, and I guarantee you'll get different signal strength bars on your mobile phone. Guarantee it. And therefore, for some applications, you need that signal strength, and therefore you need that choice of network. Hence why we have 45 interconnects with networks across Europe primarily, but also different bearer services. Sometimes, there is no cellular coverage. So you might need to provide satellite, as an example. Now with GPRS as a technology being turned off by the network operators gradually over time, technology is moving to low power wide area network technologies. And therefore, again, you need to be able to offer choice out to your customers. Doesn't matter whether they're transmitting small amounts of data, large amounts of data, whether, it's in one corner of the office or another corner of the office, you're giving them what they require because they need to be able to transmit that data securely, reliably with the appropriate SLAs. And I think part of our success has been the fact that we offer that choice. We not only offer them that choice of network and bearer service, but we also provide them a platform that enables them to manage and control their estate of assets. Doesn't matter if it's 1 or 250,000 assets. And we have customers with 250,000 assets out there in the field. You need a platform to be able to manage and control all that. We all know, probably within our own companies, even managing 50 or 100 mobile phone users is pretty tough. You imagine managing 250,000 assets that are out in the field. You need to be alerted when they go over their data usage, if they've assets been moved or whatever it is. And to have that across all those different networks, those different bearer services under one window, which we call our Simplo platform, we believe is a big USP out into the marketplace.
So given that you're working with many network providers and there's different data and technology rules across Europe, does Brexit make any difference to the provision?
Generally, no. I mean, it's had very little impact on Wireless Logic. I mean, we have 12 opcos around the globe, primarily in Europe, but we have an office in China and we have an office now in the States. And generally we buy in the local currency and we sell in the local currency. So primarily we buy in euros and we sell in euros, and in the UK obviously we buy in pounds and sell in pounds. And I think in terms of sort of the import or export in terms of goods, I mean, we don't really do that because ours is primarily software and SIMs and stuff like that. So no, the short answer is Brexit has had very little impact whatsoever. And I think the only other thing that probably could have had an impact is in terms of roaming type charges. IoT is done slightly differently. So generally we have tariffs for the whole of Europe. If you go maybe into the States, you have different tariffing. But again, this is where I think, the market is evolving, where you have different profiles, which is basically different network operators on a SIM, and therefore you can switch it accordingly. And that's where the technology is moving. It's known as EUICC or eSIM technology.
Yeah.
It's kind of advancing and will continue to advance, as will low power WAN, as will 5G over the next 3 years or the coming years, basically build up to all those new technologies.
Take me through a bit of the iteration about how you come up with these new applications of IoT, because you're certainly very creative and you touch so many industries.
I think it's important to realize that we fit a part of the value chain. So I mentioned
Mm.
before, in terms of, there's the software piece in a vertical market, whether that's health or security or telematics or what have you. Then there's the module, so module manufacturers, and then you have the connectivity piece and the platform, and then generally you have what I would call sort of kind of analysis in terms of all that data. And what we do is we work with solution providers, those particular industries. So we aren't providing overall all those different solutions. We don't have all that experience within those vertical markets, but our solution provider customers do. So they have that expertise. And therefore, what we do is we go along to them and say, look, you've developed brilliant software that enables, I don't know, a patient to be able to monitor their diabetes remotely. You've got in a module to be able to transmit the data. And what we're going to provide you with the connectivity services, the platform, the security, to be able to transmit that data and securely. And then they go out and sell that complete solution out to their customers. And that's why, when I think you said at the top of the hour, that Wireless Logic probably is a relatively largest company or medium-sized company that no one's ever heard of. Why? Because our technology and our services are within a solution that's sold by somebody else.
Well, this goes straight to my next question, because I was going to ask you, because you've done a lot of cool things in the pandemic, and to help people and to help people keep safe and to help people get hold of things. So I'm going to ask you, what are you most proud of with Wireless Logic? What's the technology that makes you feel really good about what you've done?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, we've done something with the Environment Agency, a fairly big project with them. They collect data from over 5,500 different sites, I believe, for them to make sort of timely decisions on the impact of weather-related events. So they can make decisions regarding flood warnings and forecasting services, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think those type of applications, I think because they're protecting the environment, I think I could say that I'm quite proud of. But as I say, I think, there are so many in terms of how we're helping in terms of not only the environment, but people's health. I mean, there was one fairly recently, which is the cleaning and maintenance and monitoring of public loos, as an example. All those public loos that you go into, the challenge for those people who monitor and clean those loos was knowing when a cleaner has actually been in, how many times the facility has been used, the stock levels in terms of different things like, I don't know, hand lotion and stuff like that. And therefore being able to put something in that enables those things to be monitored and kept clean better. As I say, there are all these different things that, as I say, I think we come across almost new applications, certainly on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis. So it's a fascinating industry to be involved in. I feel very lucky.
I'd like to personally thank you for improving the public toilets so much. Actually, it's made such a big difference in the pandemic, where they're lovely and clean now. So that's making a difference to all of our lives. But seriously, I think you're being quite modest, because a lot of the healthcare applications where you're monitoring elderly people and people with chronic illness, that's where your connected devices are probably saving people's lives, and you're certainly keeping people independent, improving the quality of their lives no end. So I think that's a fantastic achievement. Finally, because time seems to be flying by, I'd like to ask you a bit about you. Wireless Logic has grown exponentially. You've regularly attracted new funding and expanded, and you stayed at the cutting edge for over 20 years. So I wonder if you can share a few secrets of your success. You're a great example to today's tech founders. Have you got any tips for them?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that my general rule has always been surround yourself with people who are 100 times better in every discipline than you are. And I've certainly done that within Wireless Logic. And I think, therefore, when I always look at Wireless Logic's success, it is very, very much a team effort. As I say, I think, not only surrounding yourself with people who are better than you in every discipline, one makes you look good, makes the company more successful. And I think creates that kind of team ethos, which I think is vitally important. I'd also say that, I'm a firm believer in terms of people as well, particularly in a service industry, which is very much what Wireless Logic is. Never ask someone to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself. And I think if you treat people well, you reward them accordingly, and you give them the appropriate remuneration for the job that they're doing, but also importantly, give them that career path. If you do those kind of, I believe, key metrics, then I think you'll build not only a very loyal workforce, but a very engaging culture, which means that, as I say, people will stay longer, probably work harder as well. And as a result, you'll have a more successful organization. And as a general point, I would probably say, I've been in many, many businesses. I was in the computer industry during the 90s, etc. And the only thing I would say commercially, which I really like about Wireless Logic, is the recurring revenue type model in terms of the business. So it's a bit like, a mobile phone where you pay on a monthly contract for 12 or 24 or 36 or whatever months. And generally, once you have that service within an asset that's out in the field, and that asset stays out in the field, you'll continue to get that recurring revenue. And it just means that every month you're not starting from scratch, you're building on what you've built all those months and all those years before.
That's fantastic. And of course, you're building constantly on the technology that is happening and the emerging tech. What are your plans for the future going forward?
I think further international expansion. I mean, as I say, we've got 12 offices around the globe now. Europe's a big market. It's a very complex, it's a very fragmented market with all the different regulations, the different network operators. But I think for us, we are PE backed, which means that, it's all about growth. It's all about building your presence in a marketplace. The good thing about the IoT marketplace, it's growing generally at 15 to 20% per annum. There are not many industries that are growing at 15 to 20%. I think that for us, continued expansion, not just in Europe, but maybe outside of Europe, in an industry that's growing exponentially, I think, we're pretty well set for the future.
Well, I'd like to say thank you so much, and you're definitely one to watch. So thanks for coming and speaking with us. All the very best, Oliver Tucker.
Thanks, Joanna. I really enjoyed it.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Tales from the Tech Corridor. This series is developed by Boyce Turner LLP and inspired by their tech partners and clients. I'm Joanna Goodman. Thank you for listening.